The oranges were navels from Redlands, California, packed in refrigerator cars, and they were 4 days on the Southern Pacific crossing the desert, re-icing only in Clovis, before arriving at midnight here in Wewoka, Oklahoma. The oranges were yellow and would ripen somewhere in Illinois or Ohio before arriving the next week in New Jersey. Yellow, they smelled yellow, and I imagine that must be what California and Redlands were like. Yellow, places unlike Oklahoma, places not of constant wind but occasional breeze, a nearby ocean, vast orchards of orange trees, their limbs swaying, barely silent, yellow, all of it under an afternoon moon. I stepped off the platform and onto the top of the boxcar, and in so doing I was clear from the co-op's high overhang and had a sudden view of the hot, inky night. Town was a couple of miles west, but it was invisible at this hour, in this darkness. I walked along the top of the boxcar, opening the cooling hatches. I could feel the day's heat rising, could feel the heat of the desert contained in the boxcar, rising. Beyond the co-op, the tracks curved toward town, and above the curve was the moon, rising. This moon, a hard thing, seen clearly through the sky like a white stone in a river. I kicked at the hatch clasps and opened them by hooking one of the prongs of the bident into the hoop and pulling up. On the platform, Chicken fastened the skids that connected the platform to the train. Behind Chicken, Uncle Alton pushed 100-pound blocks of ice into the chute. We'd been doing this for 3 months, and most times it was easy. The trick was to guide the blocks onto the skid, where Chicken and I, mostly Chicken because he was older and stronger, would guide them with our poles into the open spaces of the cooling hatches. If the blocks came off too slow from the chute, they'd stall and we'd have to manually create momentum. But if they came too fast, they risked sliding over the side of the boxcar altogether. Ice wasn't expensive, but the labor to cube, sled, and skid it was. We stalked the first 3 reefer cars fine, about 10 minutes per, but on the 4th, the blocks began to soften, absorb grit, and move slow. We're just going to have to lift the sons of bitches in, said Chicken. We stepped from the platform onto the boxcar with ease. He moved gracefully on top of a train, could leap between boxcars, a thing I was too afraid to try, and he was fast. He could hop an empty flat at 20 miles per hour, and the year before he'd stolen 32 bases for American Legion. I stepped across the platform and got on one end of the ice block while Chicken, straddling the gap, was on the other. Drop this mother on my toe and I'll kick your ass, he said. Chicken suffered chronic ingrown toenails, which Uncle Alton blamed on a lack of vitamin D, but Chicken knew was a result of his baseball cleats being a size too small. We lifted the ice block and sat it across the open hatch. Then we guided it in where it dropped a foot or so into the ceiling's carriage. I closed the hatch with my boot and secured the clasp. I got my boot packed in gauze, he said. Go see a doctor? Asked Uncle Alton from the platform. Don't need a doctor. Just need to get in there and dig the sons of bitch out. Why haven't you then? We worked through the night with the soft ice, skidding when we could, but mostly having to lift the blocks in ourselves. Beyond the co-op was a cottonwood line wash that ran parallel to the tracks. In it were thousands of frogs. And on that night, I remember their sound. But later, when I tell this story, I talk about coyotes running through the wash and yipping and singing at the moon. I say the night was full of coyotes, and even though it's not true, I know why I say it. But know now, here, the night was full of frog song. That summer wasn't the first summer where I'd worked for pay. I'd already spent 3 summers on the road with Chicken and Uncle Alton and some others on a threshing crew, but it was the first summer I got paid regularly, every 2 weeks in checks, each of which came in a long beige envelope that bore the name of my employer in black type, Wewoka Cooperative, P.O. Box 11, Wewoka, Oklahoma. The checks were blue, and their edges were decorated in silver filigree. I had never imagined anything could feel more important than cash, not the way my father talked about it, but they did, and I kept the small pay stubs in a tin box, not as a way to file them away for some later official importance, but because they fit alongside some of the other things there. A chert arrowhead, several blue and yellow kestrel feathers, a Mexican coin, a page from a diary I'd stolen from a girl's desk at school. Uncle Alton had gotten chicken on first at the co-op, and then, when the summer citrus business was peaking, convinced Mr. Abernathy to hire me. It felt good to work a summer near town, to not have to live out of a truck like we had, taking bathroom sink showers and gas stations, not having to walk all day behind a slow 2-gear thresher in godforsaken Nebraska, swallowing chaff in the heat under a white sky. When our checks came at the co-op, they came in a bundle that was clipped together and hung on a pegboard outside of Mr. Abernathy's office. Every other Monday, $98.75. At the end of the summer, I would be back in school, 9th grade, and Uncle Alton would go to work back at my father's restaurant and motel. Chicken was 3 years older than I was and had already dropped out of school. At the end of that summer, he'd end up, despite all the talk about going to Amarillo to play ball, working at a Texaco in Custer City over the next decade. Or rather, some town near Custer City. I've forgotten the name of it. It had been on Route 66, and now it and the Texaco and chicken have all long since disappeared. Uncle Alton was a big man with enormous, quiet hands. He loved summers because he felt like he fit the kind of work that season provided. But the rest of the year, when he ran the front desk or worked as a short order cook for my father, I think he always felt like he was doing the kind of work one does when they failed at something else. I don't think he thought it women's work necessarily, though he did work alongside my sisters and my mother. But it was a kind of labor I think he felt to be small and tedious and inconsequential. Changing fryer grease after a $3 day, he said, you begin to feel like an asshole. You don't feel like that when the 1010 Southern Pacific comes blazing in, he said. 200 coal hoppers rolling to a stop, a moving mountain. You feel a part of something bigger, he said. Much, much bigger. The string of reefer cars we iced that night were 28 long, and on the second to last car, Chicken and I pushed a block and watched it disappear through the hatch without a sound. Oh, fuck, said Chicken. What, said Uncle Alton from the platform. Snag me that lantern, Jess, Chicken said to me, and I hopped from the boxcar onto the platform and unhooked a lantern. What is it, asked Uncle Alton. When I handed the lantern to Chicken, he knelt beside the open hatch and lowered the light in. What's wrong, said my uncle. There's no carriage. It's all rotted through. Block went straight through and landed on the oranges. Uncle Alton ran his hand through his beard and said, oh boy. Fuck it, said Chicken. No, said Uncle Alton. It'll just melt off tomorrow anyway. Nobody will ever know. No, said Uncle Alton. There is product in there that is, in all likelihood, now damaged. Say it happened before it got here, said Chicken. No, Abernathy has forms for this. I'll speak with Abernathy. I'll find the forms tomorrow. I'll fill out the forms tomorrow. God damn it, said Chicken. We were just about fucking done, too. I stood in the silence and watched Chicken and my uncle. We're pulling that thing out, said Uncle Alton. Get in and unlatch the door. I'll get tongs and we'll skid it out. The boxcars were locked from the outside, and we weren't supposed to open them unless it was an emergency. Chicken raised the lantern and handed it to me. He dangled his feet through the open hatch. Then he tried lifting himself in, but after a moment it was obvious he wouldn't fit. He took the lantern back and lowered it through the opening. Fuck, I can see the sons of bitch right there. I just can't get it. Jess, Uncle Alton said, you try. You know how to open a boxcar from the inside. Uncle Alton knew I did. He'd showed me, but he was cautious and protective of me, as he always was with his brother's son, and by asking me the question out loud, he was giving me a way out if I needed it. I nodded and went over to the hatch and looked in. Chicken handed me the lantern, and when I lowered it, I could see instantly the hills of oranges 5 or 6 feet below. Just shimmy through and hop down, he said, and I thought about the space, 4 feet, between boxcars that I'd never jumped. 4 feet, so easily jumped on the ground, but which was impossible up in the air. I'll toss the lantern down to you when you get in there. As I lowered myself into the boxcar, I could see the serial number on the inside of the hatch. Made in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, it read. I rested a moment on my forearms, then lowered myself and hung by my fingertips on the lip of the hatch. Then I let go. Inside the boxcar was nothing but heat and darkness. The oranges were hard, but had broken my fall. I got to my knees, and everywhere I could feel the day's heat contained in the fruit. "You all right?" "I'm fine," I said, yelling back up. He lowered the lantern. "Can you see if I just hold this down?" "Yes." "I don't want to drop it down and have it go out." "I can see," I said. In the flickering yellow lantern light, the drifts of oranges cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Can you get over to the door?" "Yes," I said. I crawled over oranges to the bulwark and pulled myself over. There, suddenly, in a space beside the door, was a man. He sat with his knees pulled toward his chest. I inhaled so quickly I lost my voice. The man stared straight through me and stayed perfectly still. We stared at each other. Then he looked up toward the hatch, and when our gaze met a second time, I could see the fear in his hard face. I tried to yell, but there was no wind in me. I choked, and in trying to scream, moaned instead. Then I coughed up a mouthful of bile that ran down my lips and onto my chin. In the silence, I could hear him breathing. Then the man, he was a Mexican, I was sure, got up from his crouch and walked past me to the bulwark. He crawled over it and disappeared into the oranges like a snake into a river. "Jess, you got it down there?" said Chicken. I could hear Uncle Alton shouting something I couldn't make out. "Jess, you find the door?" I moved toward the door, pulled the emergency handle, and slid the boxcar's door open. The light of the co-op spilled inside, and I looked back and saw nothing. Uncle Alton came down the platform stairs with a length of burlap and a set of heavy ice tongs. I stepped out of the car and walked toward him. I could feel the bile still burning my throat, the Mexican's white eyes, the way they moved behind the hard mask of his face. I walked toward my uncle and stopped and looked back. Plainly seen now, in the open door lit by the co-op's light, was the ice block resting on the oranges. "I'll grab it and slide it out on the burlap, then we'll just haul the whole thing back to the ice house," Uncle Alton said. I remained silent. I watched as he stepped into the car. Years later, I'd moved to Amarillo, have boys of my own that I would raise in a world very different than the one I had been a child in. I would tell them this story. Only I'd tell them a version where there is no ice, no oranges, no Mexican man. In it were watering cattle cars, a string of 13 holding Mexican steers up from Hermosillo. The steers are colorful, I say, very different than the ones we see in West Texas. The Mexican steers are marked blue and green and yellow, I say, like lichen on a rock. And they are wild and buck against the sides of the wooden cattle car, making it rock. Their horns are like swords, and their eyes are black, and their breath, God, their breath is awful. I tell them about how Chicken just avoided being crushed when they broke free from the car, how they'd kicked their way through the slat boards, and how Chicken scaled the outside of a boxcar and climbed to the top. I tell them about how I hopped from the platform onto the boxcar's roof, and from there the two of us, safe, watched as the Mexican steers ran away, how they scattered into the wash, through the cottonwoods, and out onto the night plain. Running, all of them, running. I tell my boys this story because in the West, what we love most are lies. What we love are images of a stampede, of animals running, of what we think are the right stories of stealing away. Thanks.